We are live.
We're live on live stream. All right. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Dr. Ted Williams. I'm a psychiatrist in San Antonio.
And I'm Jenny Lawson. I am not a psychiatrist, but I am in San Antonio. I am an author, and I write about weird stuff and memoirs and all sorts of stuff like that. And I started getting into TMS last year. I came here because I was having very severe depression, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey, but I think probably first we should talk a little bit about TMS itself, because I'm sure that's the reason why you're all here, is to learn a little bit about. So can you tell me, from a beginner standpoint, what is TMS and how does it work?
Okay, so TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. Transcranial means through the skull. So it's magnetic stimulation from outside the skull to stimulate the brain inside the skull. So transcranial magnetic stimulation. And what it is it's a way of affecting the brain's networks so that they work in a more coordinated fashion the way that they're supposed to. So the magnetic energy, as it goes through the skull and impacts the brain, creates a very gentle electrical current, stimulating an area of the brain about this big around, about that deep, 2 to 3 inches deep. Stimulated with magnetic energy, the neurons, the brain cells themselves, convert that magnetic energy into electrical energy and stimulates that area of the brain and every other area of the brain to which that area is connected in a network.
Cool. Okay. So what are the success rates? What are the statistics of how often does it work?
So the statistics, it depends on who you ask. In the double-blind research studies, the remission rate, so remission would be some definition that most people agree on, or at least researchers, on when depression is gone. That's remission. Kind of like cancer may be there, but you can't see it. There, it's in remission. Same with depression. So in the research studies, actually the remission rates are not as good as out in practice. So the remission rates are about 33% on average. And response rate, that means a 50% improvement, is about 50%. But in our clinic, and our clinic is not unusual compared to other clinics around the country, our remission rate is about 45 to 50%, and at least 70% of patients have a significant improvement. That would mean a 50% improvement. Unfortunately, only a small percentage of patients get no benefit at all. Most people get some benefit.
That's good. That's really good, because I know that was one of the biggest issues that I had, was this fear of, not only am I going to go through this process and you go through it all, and what's going to happen? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? When I started here, and actually before we talk about that, can you talk a little bit about so what's the actual process? Like, how long do you go in? How long do you do the treatment?
Okay, so each little pulse of magnetic energy would be one pulse, and there are 3,000 to 4,000 pulses given during a session. So we set aside generally an hour for an appointment, and patient arrives and checks in and is seated, and for the treatment itself, after we've determined the right place to treat and that we've determined the right amount of power to treat, an actual treatment takes 19 minutes on the left side, and if the right side is also being treated, as we usually do, that takes 15 minutes. That's for standard treatment. And that's 5 days a week. for 6 weeks, 30 treatments, and then the last 6 treatments are spaced out over the next 3 weeks. So sort of a taper is done.
Got it. All right. So, so I can say for me, I came here last year. I was was in a really dark place, and my psychiatrist had told me about TMS, and I was like, that sounds like something for crazy people. And turns out I was one of those crazy people, and I was like, okay, I give up. I need some help. And I don't even know how many types of medication. I think I was on my 9th, maybe. And so I started doing TMS, and it helped a lot. I should say I'm not getting paid for this. I'm only doing this because I have friends who are like, I'd like to know more about it. It's really scary. It was really scary for me when I started doing it. So I was like, let's do this. This will be like a fun way to let people know about it. So I don't get anything out of this, FYI. I had a very good response with anxiety. My anxiety went from just extreme to the point where I actually, at this point, I don't have to take Xanax every day. I take it maybe once a month, which is a huge difference for me. It's for my depression, I would say I was about 70% better by the time that I got out, by the time that I finished. I wasn't in complete remission, but it was absolutely worth it. The big thing that I could tell is that when I was going through the treatment, toward the end of the treatment, my family could see the difference more than I could see a difference, and they would be like, oh my God, you went to the mall, you answered the door when the doorbell rang, you made a phone call, which it sounds like it's not a big deal, but it was a real big deal. And actually at the end of the process, I agreed to go with my family on a trip to Europe for a week, which I had never, I don't travel because I'm terrified of it. So for me, that was a big deal, and that was, to me, a big sign that things were better. So it made a difference. It made a difference to me, and so thank you for that, because it's life-changing. I mean, it really is. So let's talk a little bit about the qualifications of TMS. So how many treatments and medications? I mean, I know it's for treatment-resistant depression, so how do you prove that you're treatment-resistant? How many medications do you have to go through?
So again, it sort of depends on who you ask. The insurance companies want to see patients fail at least 3 to 4 antidepressant medications and have psychotherapy before paying for TMS. That effectively limits TMS. What do the scientists say? The scientists actually recommend that after a single failure of an antidepressant medication, TMS at least be considered. And I think some of the insurances are starting to come around because what many people don't know is the more treatment failures a patient has had with medication, is the more difficult depression is to treat. And it's not just because they were more difficult to treat in the first place, and that's why they didn't respond to medication. It's that during an episode of depression, the brain is changing, and it's becoming more treatment resistant. So the short answer is, for insurance covered, a patient needs to have been on 3 to 4 antidepressant medications. But the scientists say 1 is enough to at least begin considering it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that makes sense too, because compared to, and antidepressants are great. Like, I'm still on antidepressants. They're wonderful and they've saved my life. But there are side effects to them, and it's not fun, and they're super expensive, and they're exhausting. You're depressed, and you don't want to have to go out and get your medication, and then your insurance company says, we're not covered anymore, and you're like, well, I guess I don't need it anymore, even though you really do, and it's just, compared to TMS, which is also, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort, but there aren't side effects, and and then when you're done, you're just done, unless you start to feel bad, and then like me, you come back in and say, I think I need more treatment. But yeah.
So for the first time, we have a non-invasive method of treating a particular part of the brain. So as opposed to medication that one takes that goes all over their body to affect those parts of the brain, or let's say electroshock therapy, in which intentionally through electricity a seizure is caused, affecting the whole brain, and so TMS is treating specific areas of the brain.
Got it. And actually, let's talk about, so can you tell me, what's the difference between TMS, ECT, electroshock? How do those vary?
Right. So TMS is not electroshock therapy. ECT is actually, it's still our most powerful treatment for depression. And I think there's way more stigma against using ECT than there should be. But the person is put to sleep, so there's anesthesia. They are given a seizure from which they need to recover. Their memory is not so great during those days and weeks that they're getting ECT. So it's a pretty rough treatment. Not as scary as everyone thinks it is, but it's a rough treatment. TMS, on the other hand, if you have patients drive themselves here, they have their treatment, they're talking to us during their treatment, they drive home or to work or wherever they're going after the treatment. So there's a sort of a world of difference. And on a scientific level, the seizures apparently are like pressing some sort of reset button in terms of neurotransmitters and maybe even electrical rhythms. TMS is more stimulating a particular area that's connected to other areas in a network and getting that network to work properly.
Got it. Okay, let's see. Insurance. Insurance. Not a big fan of insurance. Do they cover TMS? How difficult is it to get them to cover it?
So TMS is widely covered. Every major insurance now covers TMS and Medicare. Usually not Medicaid, but Medicare does, and the major insurances. If the patient has failed 3 to 4 antidepressants and had psychotherapy. Now, that's what insurance companies put in their policy. When it comes to actually getting it approved, sometimes it's a fight. I think actually we have been through that fight together.
Yeah. Yes, thank goodness you guys were here.
And so we were able to advocate for you, and you even advocated for yourself, which I think people watching this video may need to know that they might have to advocate for themselves to get this treatment. For years we got letters back that it was experimental and expensive. Well, it is expensive, but so are many of the medications that are used to treat depression. So the first step is for the physician to get an approval if that's how that practice handles it. And then if there's a denial, to advocate again. And if there's a denial, then for the patient to get involved. I think many insurance companies, they even have their own little division of patient advocacy. And so I want to talk to that person.
And that I would recommend finding a facility where people care to have your back. I mean, I've gone to other doctors before where they're like, oh yeah, your medication isn't covered even though it should be covered, and they're just like, sorry, insurance sucks. And what was really great was here, when I tried to get, and I was like, I'm sure they're not gonna cover it. I'm just gonna have to find a way to pay for it myself. And you guys were like, no, we're gonna help you. We're gonna figure this out. So we'll get it. We'll find a way to get it covered. And just kept going and kept going and kept going and didn't stop. And had my back. And it sucks that you have to go through so many different denials, but having somebody, a doctor and a staff who will say, yeah, we're going to keep trying, this isn't right. And not just for me, which it was great for me, but also for all the other patients who, now maybe there's a standard, and now maybe they'll say, oh, okay, well, if we approved it for her and it really helped her, and look, she was able to get off all her other medication, we're actually saving money in the end, maybe we should make it easier for people to get coverage and healthcare and, just do the right thing. Sorry, my personal demon of insurance. Let's see, can you drive and go back and forth to normal adult life after treatments? I can answer that one. You can do anything. I watched the Mindy Project when I first came. They were like, "But you know what? You should watch something positive and uplifting. Why don't you watch TED Talks and what?" And it was great for like the first week, and then I was like, "This is too uplifting, and I'm exhausted. Can we just watch? I just want to watch Glow." And they were like, "Okay, if that makes you happy, that's what we want. Is for you to be happy." I was like, "Oh my God, really?" So ask. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. I embroider is what I do. I knit. Let's see, what are the side effects of TMS versus medication? I think we talked a little bit about that. There's not a whole lot except for the possibility of seizure.
In terms of safety, there's a possibility of seizure, but that rate is 1 in 30,000.
Wow.
That's low. What it actually feels like, we affectionately call it the electronic woodpecker.
Fair.
Because the pulsing rate is about as fast as if you were to hear a woodpecker. It sounds like it. It feels like something's tapping you, although there's nothing tapping you except an invisible magnetic field. Most people call it annoying. They usually don't use the word pain, although we were talking before this, and I heard you use that word pain. I'm kind of sensitive about that. But I've had it done. I've done it, definitely can feel it. There's not a placebo effect there in terms of how it feels, but it's tolerable, and we have all kinds of ways to turn down the power and make it more tolerable until your scalp decides, oh, this isn't that big of a deal.
Right.
And actually, some patients after a while, they want to sleep, which we do not recommend. The brain changes when it's asleep.
I've been woken up.
Yeah. And so how could it be? How bad could it be?
Yeah. So for me, I think everybody's different with their pain tolerance. For me, first of all, scalp wise, it doesn't hurt at all. It really does feel like it's your skull itself. And for me, the first day, and I've had it done, this is my second set around. The first day I found it painful while it was going on, and then the rest of that, the next 20 hours, I had a mild headache. The second day, it hurt only right when it was happening, and it didn't hurt a lot. It hurt I'd say the same level of, when you're having your teeth cleaned and every once in a while they'll get a little, and you'll be like, oh, that's uncomfortable. It's not enough that you're going to be like, ow, but you're just like, oh, I didn't like that. But it's that level of uncomfortableness. And then by the third day, I could just sort of forget that it was happening. Which is weird because, it starts at a lower, sort of power, and you go up, and I would get to the point where I would be like, you can go further than that. You can go and it's amazing how quickly you get used to it. I think part of it is fear. Honestly, I think Absolutely. That is a big part of it. Is just that if I feel like it's gonna hurt more, and then I'm afraid, and yeah. So I think that was a big part of why people are afraid of it and why it can feel like it hurts. But then once you're in the third or the fourth one, you're like, oh, this is completely, you don't even think about it anymore. One thing that I did learn is there have been a couple of times where I'm like, oh, it does hurt more today. Like it actually would, and I would say like, I can feel it like in my teeth, I can feel it. And they'll be like, oh, okay, no problem. And they'll just like move and it's just that it was on a nerve and that tiny little bit. And I'm like, oh no, it's totally fine now. So yeah, I would say by the second day, you're.
And there can be a little twitching of the eye or eyebrow or face or whatever, it's just those are nerves that are accidentally getting stimulated by the magnetic energy.
Yeah. But yeah, actually every time when I'm done, because of the way that it makes my face sort of twitch when I walk out, I'm always doing like these more like sort of faces. So I'm sure when I walk out, they're like, did she have Botox? What's she doing? Oh, that's weird. Let's see. So side effects. Okay, so what if you have chronic headaches or migraines? Could that make it worse, or are you able to get help?
That's been very interesting because since mild headache is the most common side effect, one might worry, especially if they have migraines, that it would worsen their migraines. Well, as it turns out, TMS is a treatment for migraines. TMS is FDA approved for three things: depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, actually, before OCD, that's recent, that's last year. It was approved next for migraines. And now also for OCD. Now migraine treatment is in a different area than we treat with depression. And it's a handheld device that especially if a patient has migraine with aura, they have sensations that tell them if the migraine is coming on. A single pulse during the aura can abort the migraine headache.
Get out.
Or a second pulse. And so that was first approved. Then subsequently was approved was migraine prevention, and that's 4 pulses twice a day.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. So it's E-Neura, E-N-E-U-R-A, if somebody wants to look it up. I don't think neurologists in San Antonio, migraine specialists, are utilizing this treatment because I'm very comfortable with TMS. I would be happy to find that treatment for a patient and oversee it because it's harmless.
Yeah.
And if it helps, that would be great.
Yeah.
And not that I'm particularly advertising for that. But I am a little disappointed that not more people even know about the migraine indication for TMS.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it should be known.
Yeah. Well, I've heard people ask about it, but then they're always like, it just seems so counterintuitive because it's going to give you a migraine. But if it's just a couple of pulses, then that makes a big difference.
Even our patients with migraines, I don't think a single one has complained that made their migraines first. Recently, I had a patient who said that the first 2 or 3 days she was having migraines, but her migraines stopped after that. So so fortunately, migraine does not get in the way of having TMS.
That's amazing. Awesome. All right. Let's see. Are there any other medical conditions that would get in the way of having TMS?
So the only medical condition that gets in the way of having TMS is having a seizure disorder, and that's more of an insurance company restriction. If a person has a seizure disorder and they get TMS, statistically they are a little more likely to have a seizure during a treatment. So there's that. Now there are a couple of contraindications, and one in particular is having any kind of metal inside the head. Neurosurgery with clips, dental metal is not a problem. Cochlear implants, this is a contraindication. Maybe because of metal inside the implant, or there might be other reasons as well. But so there are very few reasons why a person couldn't have TMS. And if they have other conditions like thyroid disease or Cushing's or Addison's or some medical illness, and those conditions are part of the cause, underlying cause for depression, they need to be addressed, but they themselves are not a reason to not have TMS.
Right. And it's often that circular sort of thing where, so I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I'm in a lot of pain, and sometimes that can cause depression, and then sometimes my depression can keep me from going to the doctor and getting the shots that I need and exercising and the things that I need to take care of my rheumatoid arthritis, and then I get more depressed because I can't take it, and then it's just this. So yeah, I have noticed that with doing TMS, when I come in, I'm depressed and I'm exhausted and I can't do anything, and even just taking a shower to come here can feel like it is the one thing I'm going to do that day, and like that is my good for me. I actually left the house, but once I get to the end of the treatment now, and the same thing with last time, I'm walking and I'm exercising and I'm writing my book and I'm going out with my kid and I'm doing all these things that normally I would look at and go, how do people do that? Like how I don't know how that works.
So there's some interesting science behind that. Probably the strongest scientific proof of how TMS works is there's a certain area of the brain called the subgenual cingulate, and one of its main functions is assessing how difficult something is, how difficult it is. And during an episode of depression, in most people, but not in everybody, that area of the brain is overactive, number one, and number two, it's over-connected to a network in a brain function called the default mode network. Now this may be more science than you're interested to know.
Oh, that's fascinating.
But think of the default mode network is what your mind is doing when you're daydreaming, for instance. Okay, so couple an exaggerated sense of how difficult activities are with the default mode of your mind in its daydreaming state, and think about the implications of that. This constant negativity, running throughout your mind, not even when you're thinking about anything in particular. No wonder it's difficult to take a shower and do everything else when you're depressed. So one of the things that TMS does is it decreases the activity. So even though we're only reaching this far into the brain, an area that's this far away from the coil, that area is connected to that we're treating is connected to that area in a network. Treating it turns that area down, and it decreases the connection to the default mode network. And so this is part of how TMS works.
Huh. So my brain was working too well.
It was because the main network that we're treating with TMS is the network that allows a person to switch on and switch off one's thoughts. I call it the blow-offer. Mm-hmm. We all have negative things in our lives, pretty much all day. But we're able to blow off and sort of compartmentalize a negative thought so that we feel okay and can do what we need to do. That's not working very well in depression usually. Mm-hmm. People are overly negative about themselves, the world, the future, and they can't let certain things go. So so treating that area and helping that network, which has been gone weak and is now overpowered, let's say, by anxiety networks, that's part of the treatment of depression.
So is that the reason why I noticed the first thing that shows up for me that kind of shows me that this is working is usually within the first week I can sleep, and normally I have really bad insomnia. Is that related to being able to turn your mind off and your...
It is.
Okay, that makes sense, because people were like, oh, you were able to sleep all of a sudden, right? And I was like, I was able to sleep, but it's not because I was tired. Like, everybody had said, oh, you'll be able to sleep, and I was like, oh, because this is going to be exhausting, because I'm going to be, in pain, and they were like, no, you'll just be able to sleep. That explains why. All right. Let's see. So, how long does a patient need to be on maximum power in order to see the most results?
Okay, maximum power. So that really is also sort of asking the question, how do we even know how much power to use to reach the area of the brain we want to reach? And it's different for everybody, but part of the technique before that very first treatment of setting TMS up is where to treat and how much power to treat. And how much power is determined in a very interesting way. It's determined by movement of your fingers and thumb. And we went through this with you.
We did.
So
it was weird. It was
yes,
like
yes.
crazy voodoo.
So the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. And so we want to know, in the left side of the brain is the main area that's treated around the world. The most common location to treat is on the left, in the front. So we give magnetic impulse right over the area that moves the fingers and thumb, and we give a little more power, a little more power, a little more power until click, and there's a movement. And that amount of power is called the motor threshold, and we treat depression with 20% more power than that. Well, that amount of power varies a lot from person to person, depending on a number of things: how big their head is, how thick their skull is, whether or not they're older and their brain is shrunk a little bit. I might be in that category. Plenty of pulls away, and so the further away from the magnet, the less power there is. What medications people are on, whether or not they've had coffee that day, and so forth, effects. So it's important for us to determine on each patient how much power to use. Now the question was, how long does a person need to be on full power to have an effect? And I would say generally at least 2 weeks.
So how do you get to be a good patient? Like, I know, one of the things that you had said to me is, once you get into remission, you have a much better chance of staying in remission by, I think you said, exercising 30 minutes a week. Is there, should you be drinking a certain amount before you come in? Should you have caffeine? Should you not? Does it even matter? Is there anything that you're for the perfect patient to stay and to do your best and to stay on the level, is there anything that you would recommend?
So a few things. Yes, either absence from alcohol or minimal use of alcohol during those 6 or 7 weeks of treatment, I think is important. Drinking some caffeine is fine. And if one does drink, and believe me, a few of my patients have had alcohol, yes, and sometimes more than they should.
Maybe.
Maybe
just once.
But we want to know about that because that can affect, for instance, a patient's motor threshold, and we want to be careful. So alcohol is one thing. I think what the patient can do to enhance the effect of their TMS are all the things that we believe, non-medical things that we believe help with depression. Number one on the list in terms of actual scientific proof is exercise. A lot of it. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be intense. Brisk walking would count. But 30 minutes a day of exercise is as powerful, or almost as powerful as an antidepressant medication in the scientific literature. So exercise is really important. Now, what is difficult for people with depression to do?
Oh yeah, I absolutely could not do it.
Right, but if you want to know what's under your control, what you could actually do to help the process, exercise would be number one. Number two, sleep regularly, eat regularly, and then the next set of things would fall under this umbrella term of behavioral activation. What do I mean by that? When people have been depressed for a long time, their world just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's too hard. They let relationships go. They let activities go. There's decreased interest in activity, and they just and they're sort of permanently in survival mode. So coming out of depression partly has to do with improving mood and improving level of interest and maybe improving sleep. But by the time people have TMS, their whole lifestyle has changed. And so one patient said one time she was driving home from work. It was a Friday afternoon. She had been getting TMS. She was feeling much better. But it was Friday. She was a single woman. Driving home Friday afternoon, she completely intended to get in her pajamas and stay in her pajamas all weekend long. Why? Because that's what she did.
Yeah.
That was her nest, you know. And she was driving home and she stopped and thought, why? Talking to herself, you're not depressed anymore. She called a friend to do something with them. And so whenever there's any little spark of creativity, of desire to do something, I say, seize that little bit of improvement, because coming out of depression means re-expanding that world that got small.
Yes, which is hard. One of the things when I have depression, I spend a lot of time in bed, even though I really try not to, but I do. And what I've noticed is when I come out of the depression, there will be a period where it is more uncomfortable to stay in bed than to be in bed. And as soon as that happens, I'm like, oh, that's when I don't have depression right now, because it is absolutely more painful to be up when I have depression, and it's more painful to have to stay in bed when I don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, and my husband is always like, when I come out of a depression, he's like, oh, look, you're doing stuff, and why don't you keep doing this? And I'm like, it's not that easy. It's not just like, oh, I decided to not be depressed. It's but that's why I think it's so important when you do come out to grab hold of life and be like, okay, what all can I do? I want to do all the things, and I want to enjoy all the things, and I want to write this down so that I remember, because chances are I might end up back in a depressive period again, and I can look back and be like, oh, things were okay. And when I came out, I was like, oh, I can breathe. Things are not that bad. Oh my goodness, everything's fine. I wish I could go back and tell Jenny of last week, it's all okay. Like, this is all in your head. Like, just survive. Just survive and keep breathing, and it's going to be okay. And I go back and I read those whenever I'm down in a depression again, and I go, I don't believe in it, but that girl who was me said it, so maybe I'll believe it again. And I think it is important to just grasp that. The way that I explained it the other day, and I think my husband still doesn't get it. I think if you don't have depression, you can't understand it. But I was like, I need to do this and I need to do this, and he was like, why don't you just slow down, and you take it easy. I don't want you to get burnt out. And I was like, it's not that I am going to get burnt out. It's that I know that this may not last forever, so I need to take advantage of it. And I said, it's kind of like, when you're playing Mrs. Pac-Man, and you're playing, and the ghosts are getting, and you're slowing down, and then all of a sudden you eat the cherry or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you can turn around and eat the ghost, and you're like, oh my God, finally, I can get rid of all of these things that do. And then it flashes, and I'm like, oh, okay, now it's back to the, okay. So whenever I'm not in depression, it's like where I can eat the ghosts, so, which makes no sense, but let's see. So how does TMS work with anxiety?
So it works with anxiety very much like it worked with depression. If one thinks about anxiety as a brain function, it's actually a function that saves our lives. Anxiety is the ability to anticipate in the future some harmful thing so that one can take action to avoid it from happening. So a certain amount of anxiety is healthy and important. But if wherever in the brain that anxiety knob is, if it's not set on medium and set on high, either from genetics, early childhood experiences, combination of the above, alcohol, many times people when they have had too much to drink, and then afterwards, or they're, let's say they take Xanax, and that blood level is falling in the Xanax. There are all kinds of reasons why the brain would send false alarms of anxiety. TMS works by helping the brain not send false alarms and have those network functions, including the blow-offer, to work properly.
Got it. And I can say for me, for my first last year's treatment, made an incredible difference in my anxiety. I don't know if it was 100%, but it was really, just a shocking change. My anxiety did come back, a little bit, both my anxiety and depression, within the next year or so. But again, it's helping and making a difference. And I would say it's probably like 80% better this time. But I would say my depression is much better this time. Like last time, it felt like it really helped my anxiety, and it helped my depression quite a bit. And this time, it felt like it helped my anxiety quite a bit, and it's really helped my depression, especially like even just in the last week. There's so much of a difference.
And do you attribute part of that improvement this time to our treating that third area? You know how we usually treat, first 15 minutes on the right, then 19 minutes on the left, and then we started treating that area over your right eyebrow. What was your experience with that?
I don't know. That definitely is the biggest difference. So I would say that's probably where I would attribute it. I know, when you first talked about it, that this section really helps with sort of the way that I remembered it is that there's like a filter, and like the bad stuff gets focused there, and so when I'm focusing on negativity, and I actually would sort of search out negativity,
right.
Like it would sort of like, even though I'm like, I know I shouldn't, but I cannot help it, all I'm gonna watch is horror movies and true crime podcasts and whatever that terrible thing that's going on in politics that I'm like, no, I don't want that to happen. I've got to see what's happening. And after that, I all of a sudden noticed I am listening to comedy podcasts, and I'm, watching funny things, and I'm all of a sudden thinking, you know what, I don't have to be aware of every bad thing in the universe, because there are good people out there who are working on good things, and I just need to be my best self. And that's one of those things that I knew before but didn't feel before. So
you found yourself having less of an attraction to the negative.
Yes. Yeah. I still watch horror. I still, like the dark. But before, it felt like I almost was imprisoned by it, like where I was like, I really don't want to hear about terrible things, but I absolutely need to hear about all of them, because if I don't know about them, then it's something even worse is going to happen.
The word that I use is compulsively drawn to the
Yes.
negative.
Yeah.
And that area has to do with the same network that we treat when we treat obsessive compulsive disorder. So even though you don't have OCD, many people with depression have a certain OCD quality to their depressive symptoms, and they might need treatment of an area that's not the standard area.
Yeah.
This is all off-label. The FDA has not approved this, but what the FDA approved is now 11 years old. So science has been advancing, and the field is growing.
You know, I know we never really discussed this, but I have noticed, and I don't know if it has to do with the anxiety and depression, but I have, I don't even remember how to pronounce it, trichotillomania, like pull my hair.
Right, exactly.
And I have not been, I mean, I still will occasionally, but before it was really severe to where I would have to, like, you know, put coconut oil on my hair at night to keep my fingers out of it, to keep from pulling it, and I haven't had to do that for any of this session for the last probably month. Is there any connection to that?
There would be. So you're saying that didn't decrease so much after the first treatment, when I treated you the standard way.
It went away a little bit, but it still continued. But this time, I definitely have found a difference.
And the feeling is that it's that same network. So trichotillomania is compulsive hair pulling. And it's not OCD, but I think we psychiatrists see it sort of in the same family of illnesses.
Interesting. All right. Let's see. And does it hurt? We've already talked about that. Does it work on bipolar disorder?
So TMS does work on bipolar depression. There are multiple research studies, good-sized, well-powered, double-blinded studies showing that it works. It's not FDA approved, and therefore it's not approved by insurance companies. So that's a sad thing, because then the cost of TMS gets in the way. But it is a good treatment for bipolar depression. Now, it doesn't treat mania, and the highs. Actually, though, most people with bipolar disorder do not spend their time with the highs. They spend most of their time depressed. And we have very few medications that are actually very effective for bipolar depression. So I see in the future bipolar disorder as being an important condition to be treated with TMS, but we're going to have to jump the hurdle of it getting FDA approved and covered by insurances.
Got it. All right. Let's see. Have you had any patients do, I actually asked you because I was thinking of this myself, TMS and ketamine at the same time?
So I have not had any patients getting the two treatments simultaneously. For a few years from now, I've been wondering. It seems like it's a marriage made in heaven, really. Ketamine works fast, but doesn't last. TMS works slowly, but it lasts. So in theory, it would be so nice for ketamine to sort of jumpstart the patient to get them out of the depression. And then TMS actually help create the network changes to sustain that improvement, but that hasn't been proven yet. It's being looked at. There are research studies starting now on that. It might not be a good idea to have ketamine and TMS on the same day until that's been proven to be safe, because there could be a little higher risk of seizure. But it's something that I'm interested in.
Okay, all right. So when TMS doesn't work, why doesn't it work?
So unfortunately, TMS doesn't work on everyone. I said that in our clinic, 30% of patients don't get a 50% improvement. Fortunately, only a handful of patients don't get any improvement at all, but still, it's so very disappointing when people don't improve with TMS. But the reason is because depression is not one thing. It's many things that all fall under the lump of depression. Like a couple of 100 years ago, doctors might have said, yes, I'm treating a cough. Well, now we would want to know, what kind of cough? And what's causing the cough? And what's the best treatment for the cough? And we're just not there yet in terms of the science. So there are certain patient profiles, and we've tried to identify certain patient profiles that would be better candidates for TMS, but so far we haven't really been able to do a good job of figuring out exactly who will respond and who won't.
Got it. Yeah, when I first came, I was like, there should be a thing where, like, if it works for you, you pay double, but then if it doesn't work, you don't pay it off. Because I was like, it just seems, let's see. So, we answered that one already. Okay, people under 18, can they have TMS, adolescents, children?
So there's a lot of interest in TMS in children and adolescents, and there has been at least one major research study. The results are not final, and what I know of that study so far is that in terms of safety, it looks like a very safe treatment. Now that hasn't been proven, and it's not FDA approved yet. But since there have been over 1 million treatments given to adults, the bad things have had time to surface. So we're less afraid now to look at using it in children and adolescents. I have a policy of treating people 13 and older. But in the future, TMS might be used for OCD. OCD usually starts in childhood or teens.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be great, and medications only work half the time? Exposure therapy also helps. Wouldn't it be great if a teenager didn't have to wait 5 years before they could get TMS for OCD? That I feel that's an important area that needs to be explored. Autism has everybody interested.
There's a great Invisibilia podcast about autism and TMS, and it was fascinating.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interest, but I just recently had one of our special live webcasts by Lindsay Oberman, who's one of the main researchers in TMS for autism, and we're just not there yet. The brain's complicated, and there are multiple networks involved, and in each individual person, the networks don't fall exactly on the same place. So right now, at Harvard and various other research centers around the world, literally being mapped out are what networks go with what symptoms and what brain functions, so that maybe in the future, we might be able to better target. See, autism is in one of these disorders that call something autism. What do you mean? Because there can be people who are so severely autistic they can't even talk, and there are people with autism who are CEOs of companies and everything between. Again, since TMS is this cool little trick of exciting or suppressing networks. Well, which ones and where are they located on a specific person to do what symptom? And so someday, yes, we will be using it in children. On label, and currently it is available off label.
Awesome.
Tourette's might be another area that could be helped with TMS.
So I was very lucky that my psychiatrist was like, you need to go to Genesis, that's going to be a great place for you. But where should people go to find a provider in different places? How do you find one that you can trust?
How can you find what you can trust? Okay, well, first, finding a provider, usually it's just a matter of going to the internet and typing in TMS and doing a search, and providers in one areas with internet works, providers in that area will pop up. Neurostar, one of the makers of one of the devices of TMS, Neuronetics with their Neurostar machine, they have a way of typing in one's zip code, and the providers, at least in that area, who at least use their device, pop up. So by geographic location, then one can find a provider. I think many TMS providers are really, really good providers. Usually the psychiatrist doing TMS, they have an intellectual curiosity, desire to help people, and so it's almost like most people wouldn't be doing TMS if they didn't have an interest. But I think word of mouth is a good way to find out if the provider doing TMS, what their approach is.
Right. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, I think we answered all of the questions that anybody asked. The only other thing that I would say is, to anyone out there listening that
I thought of one more thing.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I want to at least mention a sort of new concept of TMS called accelerated TMS. And what's accelerated? So how TMS is done is treatments 5 days a week for 6 to 8 weeks, and that's fine if you could get off work, happen to live or work close to a device. But what if you don't? What if you live a couple hundred miles away from a device? Or what if you live in another country? And what the scientific evidence is pointing to is it's not the 6 to 8 weeks that makes a difference. It's the number of treatments a person has had that makes a difference. And so now, and there have been a few research studies, and I admit it's not many and not with a large number of patients yet, to really see how it's going to pan out. But the idea of taking all those treatments and compressing them into 1 to 2 weeks is effective for treating depression and safe. Now, this needs to be borne out, but I'm convinced that it's safe, and I have already treated patients, one patient in particular recently, who got 25 treatments in a week, and it was effective for her depression, and her depression is still relieved. She had 3 boys. She lived 300 miles away. She could not get TMS, but she could take out 1 week, and she's very much improved. So I think accelerated TMS, insurance doesn't cover it. Very few places are doing it, but it is something to keep in mind for people who don't otherwise have a way to get to TMS.
Awesome. That's fabulous, actually. There's so many people who just can't do it. That's great. It feels like every time I come here, I learn something more, and I'm like, it's gonna get better, which is a really good thing, because it was not that long ago when nobody was talking about it, and nobody wanted to admit that they were dealing with it, and
many physicians don't know about it. My own attitude towards TMS before I started doing it in 2012 was TMS, real expensive, doesn't work very often. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I really think that that's still where a lot of my physician colleagues are. And they don't realize that it's a powerful treatment. Insurance is covering it. And instead of trying medicine number, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that TMS should be considered as an option much earlier in the process because of suffering and outcome.
For me, with one of the antidepressants that I was on caused really bad suicidal ideation, and that this is not a side effect with TMS. And there was one that had you had no sex drive, or you had, and they're all. I'm still, I'm staying on my antidepressants. I love them, but the side effects are not fun. And with this, the only real side effect is, I have to watch the Mindy Project for an hour a day. But that's it. So, which in a way is kind of nice. And what was really weird is when I finished the treatment last year on the last day, I just felt like, how am I gonna miss this? Mm-hmm. And it was such a strange but really wonderful, a strange but wonderful thing. And I actually was like, I'm going to take that same hour that I would have spent in the chair, and I'm going to use it for myself. So I go walk the dog, and I, swim, or I, do something for myself.
Well, wasn't it true too, though, that in that hour span, that 36 times that you were getting treatment, yes, you were, you could call that self-care, that you could do at home. But wasn't it true that also with the TMS treater, that you were developing a relationship?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And that very connectedness was part of the healing process.
Absolutely.
And so I think that as well is that when people have been depressed, they let relationships go. They don't have the energy for them. They don't want other people to see how bad off they are, and so forth. But then the very relationships that nourish their souls are gone, and you can't switch them on and off like a light switch.
Yes.
So being then very deliberate about reconnecting and making new connections is important.
Yes.
Then and then something you reminded me of about medications. Jumping back to that subject. So one question is, well, what happens to medications when you're getting TMS? And that is done different ways by different physicians. But in general, I think it's a good idea to go off of antidepressants that are causing side effects, but potentially stay on an antidepressant, or even two, if a particular combination has worked sort of well. During TMS, there's some evidence that TMS causes medications to work better, and medications cause TMS to work better. So for the most part, patients continue their medications during and after TMS.
Right, and that's when I finished my TMS treatment last year. My psychiatrist was like, "If you want to, you can." It seems like you're doing well. If you want to, cut it in half, you can. It's up to you. And I was like, I kind of feel like I should just stay on it just in case. She was like, I totally agree. Let's do that. And so that's what we did. And it feels like it works. So, and if it works.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, the medication is not acting as a treatment. It's acting as a relapse prevention strategy.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, it took a while for me to understand that if something didn't work for me, that it wasn't that I failed the treatment, but it was that the treatment failed to work for me. And just like, if somebody has cancer and it's like, oh, well, that radiation didn't work, it's not like, oh, well, forget it, you ruined cancer. It's like, oh, no, well, let's find something else. Let's find something else. And you have to keep trying, and it can be exhausting, especially, when you go through, I feel like I've tried every antidepressant and every, type of treatment, and I'm just so happy when something does work, but it can be so frustrating. And I think for a lot of people who are in TMS, they've gone through that process to get to the point where they're like, I'm treatment resistant, and once you hear that, then you're like, I'm resistant to ever change. And
Here's a couple statistics that people may want to know. So if a patient reaches remission from their TMS, 1 year later, there's a 70% chance that they will still be in remission. 60 to 70% chance that they'll still be in remission. And if they do have a relapse, there's an 85% chance that they'll respond to more TMS.
Wow.
So apparently if TMS works once, it works again. And depression, unfortunately, is highly relapsing. So here you were, you had treatment, and then, about a year later, you needed treatment again. A, too bad. B, good that the treatment could be relied on again to be effective.
Yes. And one of the main things that TMS actually has given me is hope. That even when it's bad, even when I was doing the TMS treatment, like the first part of this session, it wasn't working as quickly as it had before, and instead of getting depressed about it, I was like, you know what though, it did work in the past, and that means I have hope that it'll work in the future, and that even if this doesn't work for some reason, it stops working, I have hope that something else will work. And that really is the thing that I think TMS gave to me more than anything else. It's just the idea that we are making such strides, and there's so much hope, and that's important because I'm come from a big family of people who all have depression. So it's not just for me. I'm very lucky that I'm in the place where I am. I have a lot of privilege that I can afford to do this and I can come in, but I have a lot of family members who can't, and I keep them updated with, that's the burst treatment thing. That's something that I'm going to talk to them about. So it's helpful for me to know things are getting better, and even if something doesn't work for me, maybe it's going to work for somebody else, and then, that's how the world goes around. Awesome. So should we get in the chair?
Let's do it.
All right. So you guys can see what it's like.